All right, good morning, and thank you for watching this response video. It is my first time doing a response video um, in response to this interview you see on the screen here between Mearsheimer and Deason. So this was pretty popular. I think this was recorded yesterday or the day before, and really great content as far as it goes, especially in relation to the establishment press and the mainstream narratives. Mearsheimer and Deason are among the best critics of U.S. foreign policy, Western foreign policy. The problem is, of course, that they're liberals, and they have a liberal framework, and the liberal framework is just incapable of proper analysis. So this is the problem with liberalism. And while I was watching this video at about minute 17, I kind of I decided to do this response video because it's just so egregious. It's just so egregious that I feel compelled to do a response video and explain the difference between a socialist framework and a liberal framework, and why the liberal framework is truly incapable of providing any useful explanations concerning the big picture, what is actually going on. And so again, Mearsheimer and Deason among the best at to a certain extent in being critical of Western foreign policy, but it's their liberal framework that just really puts a cap on what on the kind of analysis that they're able to do. So let me just start this video, and then we can discuss on the other side. Here we go. Let's see.
I think, Glenn, the Western elites, and we're talking here mainly about the European elites, have convinced themselves that Putin is the devil incarnate, that Russia has grandiose ambitions, and that we in the West are destined to fight a war with Russia at some point, hard to say where. But for the time being, we're in an intense security competition with the Russians. This is why we have to keep Ukraine intact. It's the battering ram. It's our principal weapon against the Russians while we're in the process of rearming for World War III. But you want to understand that that war is coming. It's just inevitable because Putin is this, he's this congenital aggressor, and he runs a country that has a rich history of aggression. So we really have no choice. Now, you and I both believe this argument is ludicrous, and I think ludicrous is an accurate word here. I don't understand where this story comes from, but that doesn't matter. They have been telling this story for so long now that I think they believe it. And I think that they have motivated, there's all sorts of motivated biases at play here that you were talking about. If you want to convince your public to support increased defense spending, this story fits perfectly. If you want to keep the Americans in, this story fits perfectly. So it's not, I think, like these people are saying, what can we do to get the Americans in? What can we do, or to keep the Americans in? What can we do to keep or increase public support for our policies? And then they come up with this particular strategy. I don't think that's what's going on. I think it's much more unconscious. And I think it all revolves around the fact that if you tell yourself these stories long enough, you really come to believe them.
Okay, so that's the liberal explanation for what is driving these foreign policies that we're seeing play out today. It's really useless in explaining what is going on and why. So why is the West pursuing a policy of aggression, against Russia, against Iran currently, and against the a future policy of aggression against China. So the reason is because the U.S. has unconsciously, or the West has unconsciously told itself this narrative that they now believe. I mean, that's it. So I don't know. That's not helpful. That's not persuasive. It doesn't make any sense. And this is the limitation of the liberal framework. So the materialist analysis, the socialist analysis, the Marxist analysis understands that there are class dynamics at play, and so and we have to go back to in history to understand really precisely what's going on. And so we have to understand how the advent of capitalism resulted from a successful revolution against feudalism. And what resulted from feudalism was oligarchy. And, the ruling class that was the church and the hereditary monarchy gave way to an expansion that included the oligarchs, the ownership class, those owners of the banks and industries. They became the new ruling class. And so essentially, hereditary monarchy gave way to oligarchy. And that's the system that has, existed, for the past several hundred years, Western oligarchy. And then, in the 20th century, we saw socialism struggle to manifest itself in this oligarchic world, this capitalist-dominated world. And we've seen how the capitalists have done their best to, maintain their oligarch system against the, the efforts of humanity to improve on their oligarchic system. So the oligarchs have no interest in improving things. They want to maintain the status quo in a very similar way that the church and the hereditary monarchy fought to maintain their system. But the capitalists did win that revolution. And it was progress. It resulted in a better system than the feudalist system that had prevailed for thousands of years. So, but to appreciate what is going on, we have to think about class. We have to think about the oppositional class interests between the ownership class and the working class majority. So the ownership class minority and the working class majority have a conflict of interests. And so the interests of the ownership class are diametrically opposed in many respects to the interests of the working class. And So there's a competition, there's a struggle. There's a struggle to control the levers of state power. And so, in the West, obviously, the ownership class has been successful at being the ruling class and capturing the state and using the state for their own ownership class purposes. And we've seen a history of successful working class revolutions. We saw that in the Soviet Union, Cuba, and in China, and Vietnam, of course. So, and we've seen the efforts by the ownership class to to maintain the status quo and to ensure that these successful revolutions did not spread and did not ultimately result in a big change around the planet where the working class becomes the new ruling class. And so, and this again is the primary driver for all of the events we're seeing play out today. And so the United States is kind of the headquarters. Ever since the end of World War II, the United States became the headquarters of the transnational Western oligarchy, and that oligarchy, has no interest in identifying or pursuing, what quote unquote the liberals call a national interest. So there is no such thing as a national interest. There are nation states, but nations are comprised of competing classes, and only one of which can, it is the ruling class. And so in the West, you have, a whole bunch of nation states controlled by the same class. And so what happens is these countries become, weapons and tools for the ruling class to pursue its global class interests. And so when we think of things in terms of global class interests and maintaining the system that benefits the Western oligarchy and maintains the Western oligarchs as the ruling class, like this, these are the primary considerations and the primary drivers for the strategies and the behaviors that we're seeing currently. And so essentially, and even liberals can agree that China, is the greatest threat, right? Even Mearsheimer understands and acknowledges that China is the greatest threat to the United States, right? They're a peer competitor. And so Mearsheimer's liberalism talks about how it would be in the national interest of the United States, to contain China, right? And to make sure that China does not become a dominant regional force in Asia. And so he thinks it's completely natural for the United States to do what it can to quote unquote, contain China. But that is it's just so confused, right? Because number one, if we think about the rational national interest of the United States, crashing the global economy or engaging in a conflict that's going to result in nuclear war, it can't possibly be in the U.S. national interest. And so the problem is liberalism just doesn't understand the class dynamics, and it's the Western transnational oligarchs who are interested in really pacifying the planet and making it safe for them to behave with impunity, right? So they don't want any obstacles or any checks on their power and on their behavior. Like they want to do whatever they want to do anytime they want to do it. And so any obstacle to that impunity, they're going to identify, and they're going to develop strategies in order to deal with those things that limit their freedom, to act with impunity. And so this is, of course, the primary driver. And when Mearsheimer, ignores this class dynamic, it's just a really tremendous limitation on the analytical framework and the analytical ability to explain things in a way that allows for people to have an understanding and really know where they should put their activism, and where they should put their support. Socialism explains that real progress is going to result from socialism, and empowering the working class majority to control the state instead of the ownership class minority. And of course, the West is an oligarchy. It is controlled and dominated by an oligarch minority, and it's this minority that is using its control of the state and all of the private as well as public institutions, like the media. It owns the establishment press. It, of course, owns the Pentagon. It controls the military-industrial complex. It owns the intelligence community, the Federal Reserve. So really, it controls every aspect of power, right, in the West, and it uses those things, not for any liberal idea of what is in the best interest of the working class majority, but it uses those things in the best interest of the oligarch minority. And oftentimes it is to the detriment of the oppositional interests of the working class majority. So again, if the working class majority wants stability, peace, prosperity, development, the utilization of technology to benefit the majority, as opposed to benefit the profit-seeking interests of a billionaire or now trillionaire class of people, we're interested in a fundamental change of systems. And so this is what's going on. This is the oppositional class interest. This is class struggle manifested in the 21st century. And what we need to do is to say it clearly. It's class. We need to talk about class. We need to recognize and understand that the ownership class has interests that are opposite the working class, and we need to understand that they own everything. It is a oligarchy. It is a capitalist dictatorship. It is the gangsters of capitalism, the gangsters of capital, who are waging a war against humanity and against these nation states that represent improvement. They represent improvement. They represent a break with the old oligarch system and an embrace of a socialist system that is interested in pursuing the interests of the working class majority instead of the interests of the oligarch minority. And so, the liberal analysts who are incapable of analyzing outside of their liberal nation state frameworks, where the nation states are the primary actors, they're just very unhelpful. They're not. They're missing the big picture, and they don't provide any rational explanation for why the West is doing what it's doing, for why the West is embarking on an aggressive, violent policy, against really humanity, but against China, Iran, and Russia specifically right now, because those are the three primary nation states who represent obstacles to the total impunity and to the the full spectrum dominance of the transnational Western oligarchy.